Hello and welcome to the installment of the Wyfutbol podcast with me, Michael Dryden and Etches Adogru. Today, amid the fallout from England's defeat to Italy in the Euro 2020 final at Wembley, we discuss how far England have come under Gareth Southgate. Before we start, please follow us on Twitter at Yfootball_ and subscribe with us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Acast, and YouTube. Good evening, Etches. How are you doing? I believe I saw you as one of the hooligans barging through the doors at Wembley. I saw a clip of you. Is this correct?
That's that joke was so bad. I'm not even going to credit it with an answer, but no, unfortunately, I wasn't at the final. I was watching it at a pub in South London at a random location. Obviously, it's very, very sad with the final result. But there are some positives for me. I think overall, there's always positives when you lose. Hence, we're doing this episode to shine a light on them. So yeah, in terms of how am I still a bit sad of the defeat. Arsenal just lost to Hibs in pre-season as well. Yeah, it's not looking good. But how you doing?
Yeah, not bad. I thought I'd be more sad about England losing. I was very sad at the time, but like I've gotten over it quicker than what I thought I would. I mean, even though we've only had a couple of days, I think just getting to a final, I thought I'd never see in my lifetime. So that in itself was like just incredible to see. But obviously, it was heartbreaking at the end. Pickford nearly became the hero. Two penalty saves, and you're not winning the shootout. It's just mad. Like he must be absolutely fuming. But no, it's yeah. But aside from that, not bad. And now though, you know what it is. Yeah, it makes it worse. I'm a Sunderland fan. This makes it even worse. But going from watching like that caliber of game, then going to watching like regular season or like preseason, or in particular League One, is going to
Mm.
be it's going to be a stretch.
So I thought we'd kind of break up the episode into some of the positive sections. So, I think first one for me is the media. And, public perception has changed massively for the England squads, and that can't be underestimated. I remember back in Capello's time where ketchup was banned and the players
Mm,
seemed like a very us versus them. I think as well, though, under Capello, which was interesting was, he had this massive reputation and England like really trusted him to do a really good job, but ultimately results were disappointing and the players seemed quite miserable. You hear ex-pros as well, such as Rio Ferdinand and Frank Lampard and Ben Foster and all these types of characters go on about how disjointed the camps were, how
mm,
the players from Man United stayed with Man United, how that's all changed. And I think the media perception now, by having access to these players, seeing them swim together or play basketball together.
yeah.
The real camaraderie with the players, which I don't think, well, I know previous generations say didn't exist. And for the public, we had no idea. Part of the reason why people love seeing Bukayo Saka, for example, or why they love seeing people like Jack Grealish is because of these clips that the media or the England
Mm,
media team have shown us, right? When they're doing like shooting drills and they're all having a laugh. And I think that's really humanized the
yeah.
players, which benefits them because for part-time fans or fans that aren't that involved, they want to see, you know what, I don't love football. I love following England, but these guys are really likable. And I think that will really benefit England in future tournaments.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it like completely connects kind of the younger generation with these players. So like I think England did a lot of work and really stepped up their media work on the likes of Twitter and Instagram. They've got all these like video montages. You've got like, people from different backgrounds getting involved, different artists from different genres on these clips. And it's really actually engaging with the youth and engaging with actually some of those players that are in the squad. I mean, some of these players are like kids like 19, 20. So having that kind of atmosphere of old, as you mentioned, under Capello, where it was like authoritarian kind of regime with, as you said, the players sitting on their own tables or just not mixing generally. Whereas now they're actually mixing. They're mixing. We saw the squad versus the media darts game, for example. If we talked about the media elements, like before, I don't know if you've seen Mike Bassett's England manager at Chess. I only actually watched it for the first time quite recently. And it's obviously just like a big joke of a film, a bit like an Ali G kind of Sacha Baron Cohen kind of film, even though he didn't
Yeah.
make it. And on that, it's really kind of like just the journalist, almost like the journalist versus the England team, or versus like the manager to try and like get stuff out of them because they're trying to bleed stuff out. Whereas the suspicious kind of England coaching staff or the manager Mike Bassett is just not giving anything back. Whereas now they're actually mixing. You're always going to have that kind of to and fro, and I think, or between the media and kind of say the setups. Like, the media want to know everything. England don't want the media to know everything for obvious reasons. Sense of information. To not to give information away to the side. But seeing out the squad versus the media darts games, I just think it was quite a nice touch, and it builds into this overall like facet that you mentioned around actually just making quite a nice place to be, a nice camp. I mean,
Yeah.
I recall hearing stories from like that kind of era as well, where players you refer to the Capello era, where like players don't want to even feature for the national side, not in the tournaments, but like they get called up for a friendly, they don't want to go. Maybe they call their agency and how can you get me out of this game? Can I feign an injury of some description? Whereas now they look like they really actually love being there. Like as you said, the Bukayo Saka stuff where he's on that like inflatable unicorn.
Yeah.
And it was the same with Pickford in 2018 and Harry Maguire on the back of this unicorn. It looks ridiculous, but like it actually makes it look like a nice place to be. And I think
Mm.
it's arguably easier in England because we basically played the whole tournament in England and had access to our own facilities. But even in Russia, they did a lot of work around creating a camp that was, a good place to be and actually fun to be. Like, and these are kids, mate. These like teenagers. They don't want to be sitting around in shirt and tie, having these like. I mean, they might be doing that anyway, but like having this really strict schedule and regime, and
Yeah.
can't talk to each other, can't have a drink if they want to, which is not really an issue now, but maybe 20 years ago was. So I think it's a huge point around why England have come on since say the Capello era.
Yeah, I think they've done really, really. I think it's helped. It really helps with the media backing. I know that in when people win or lose, there are criticisms as there should be because when you don't win, there must be a reason, right?
Mm.
But I think the support for a lot of the players for the nation, I know there has been a lot of abuse which has gone on, which isn't tolerable at all,
Yeah.
you know, but there's been so much support. And I think that is in part due to how they see these players as humans. Too often,
Mm.
sportsmen away from football are seen as machines, right?
Mm.
That can just keep on going. They have no personality, no empathy, no feeling, but they do. And I think that's what the media has really helped these England players, be able to show to the world, which I think has really impacted their performances. And on top of all of that, we've got Gareth Southgate, who has spoken brilliantly on multiple issues for the England camp, whether it's been taking of the knee, whether it's been abuse of players, whether it's been about penalty takers, whether it's been about form on certain
Yeah.
players. I remember when there was so much media uproar about Trent and he promised him his place. And I think he's spoken really, really, really well to the media, which has helped galvanize support. I mean, it's very rare. People may criticize him as an actual manager, but in
Mm.
terms of being a nice person, which I think is actually helpful in international football, which is a different game, I think he's been second to none. And I think he's been brilliant for England for that reason.
Yeah, definitely. And so I've had so many conversations with friends around like them saying, "Look, Southgate's not a top manager. Why have we got Gareth Southgate?" Even like mainly before the World Cup and the success of that. But even like after the World Cup when we did so well before this tournament, saying we don't have faith in Gareth Southgate because what has he done in the game? But I mean, what did Joachim Low do in the game before he went to Germany? At the international level, you don't have there isn't really this pull for great coaches to go and manage them at international level because obviously it's completely different to club level. It is to an extent overall. I mean, the World Cup is the most prestigious tournament in world football, arguably, but the rest of it isn't necessarily as prestigious as winning on the club stage. It's obviously not as lucrative. You're not playing a lot. You're not with the players a lot. It's a completely
Mm-hmm.
different type of role. Really, it's completely different. And obviously, they're very similar in the fact that they've got to pick sides for football matches on a match day, but they spend a lot of time going viewing players that are not they're linked to other clubs. There's a lot of politics around that, and so I think like and I've said to friends like having a pragmatist such as Southgate in terms of off the pitch, not necessarily about tactics, but off the pitch, having someone who can really galvanise a squad, actually make it somewhere players want to be, is been so key. And the fact that he's this nice guy. I saw a quote, and I can't verify it, but I saw a quote on Twitter where I think it was, I don't know what publication it was even on, so it's quite a poor reference, but apparently a player had asked if it was okay to call Gareth Southgate Big Nose in training because I think for them, they just seen like the England setup as a bit of a joke. And then when Southgate came in, what did that do to appease it? You had the Aldi's debacle, which is a joke in itself. And then Southgate comes in, everyone's like, "Oh my god, what like this guy is literally managed at Middlesbrough
Mm.
and the under 21s or whatever." And this isn't how is he going to stay England to glory? But actually, his work off the pitch has led to us to actually have a obviously we've got a better side now, and we're not going to overlook the fact that we have a much better side than what we did in Hodgson's era, for example, where we went out to Iceland. We do have a better side, but I don't think those sides of the Capello side, for example, they weren't bad sides, and they should have done a lot better than what arguably they did. So I think the way they've reshaped the kind of format and how they've galvanised the whole squad has just been excellent. Has been such a massive factor in bringing us through.
Yeah, definitely has, and hopefully now it can really drive England on for the future. Because I really do think now this is a pivotal moment. I thought the semi-final before was a shock, and this was still a surprise to many. But I think they're really building momentum to potentially, come out of this even better next time. And I think, as I said, the media perception of the team and the way the players have come across to the media has definitely been a massive, massive boost for England compared to previous campaigns. So the next one I wanted to look at was youngsters going into the competition. England had the second youngest group in the competition behind Dryden's favourite team, Turkey. They had the youngest team in terms of weighted minutes, which I assume is deduced by the number of minutes that have gone to young players. I think it's been critical exposure or critical experience to some key players are only going to get better. I think the exposure for Bellingham, who's playing league championship football 2 years ago, will be exceptional. For Saka, Sancho, Rashford, even the slightly older players like Calvin Phillips is still quite young. The other players, Phil Foden as well, Dominic Calvert-Lewin, players that are good can only get better. And this experience will really, really help them. I think 2022 was what Greg Dyke said when he was chairman. That was the aim for England before the 2018 World Cup. And I think when you look at the team and how it's transformed over that time, you can definitely see that being feasible.
Yeah.
There are some changes to make in that squad, but one of the positives is youngsters. And a point I'd like to make, actually, which is slightly controversial, is I think that what Southgate did in terms of his penalty selection says a lot about how he sees England's future. And I know
Yeah.
that people are saying, oh, experienced heads should take it. And there's loads of information on Twitter about who's missed how many penalties and who's taken them. But I think it's it's a really brilliant statement and a very brave call to look at some of the younger members to your squad and say, these are the players that are going to be here in the future and who I trust. Because often we screamed about Phil Foden for years because Pep Guardiola didn't trust him because he felt he wasn't ready. And I think for England, what we're doing is we're entrusting these young players with big moments. And unfortunately, this time they didn't manage to score. But I think that only puts us in good stead again to move forward. I mean, you would be hard pressed to find a manager who goes and picks such a young crop towards the end of the shootout. But I'm here for it. I really am, because I think those three guys in particular, in Rashford, Sancho, and Saka, will be or already are world beaters.
Yeah, and also Southgate was with that squad, and the squad were together for what, like 6-7 weeks.
Yeah.
So, and how often would they have trained penalties? A lot. So, how many times have you seen Bukayo Saka take a penalty in training? I know it's not the same. I know he's never taken one in professional football, like since he's broken through. That's also because of his age and the fact that he's only just came off the back of a breakthrough season. But he would have seen him take countless penalties. I don't think he's. So I take your point, and I agree with it. But I also think Southgate would also fancied him to score because he's seen him take penalties. I did think that Bellingham would possibly play more, but I suppose that Rice Phillips combo did work so well. And in some regards, he did make changes every game, Southgate, but overall, you don't, in these total football, you don't tend to change a winning side. France didn't too much in the World Cup in 2018, particularly in the spine, and that's where we didn't change at all, really. Whereas on the flanks we did. But I thought Bellingham might feature a bit more, maybe get a bit more game time. I do kind of wonder, and this is kind of it's a little bit of a question for you, really, Ches, is I wonder if Sancho and Bellingham would have featured more had they been playing in England, which is not necessarily like an attack at Southgate for saying, oh, you're not picking players to play abroad, because it is such a new thing for us to have English players of good quality playing abroad. And it's, even then, there's not that many still. Um, I wonder, had they played in England, if Sancho had been playing Premier League football, would he have started more games? I mean, COVID would have affected Southgate and his staff's ability to travel, but then that is the case for every international manager. So I don't know what you think about
No, I think. Look, there's an argument about Jadon Sancho from England fans. Look, I've watched Sancho in full matches about 10 times in my life away from England.
that. Yeah,
And I would say that that is more than about 85% of people that are telling me that Sancho should play.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
fully aware with his numbers because we live in an era of social media numbers. People doubt that people such like Ryan Giggs wasn't any good because he wasn't scoring 15 goals a year wide, because a lot of wingers do score 15 goals now wide. A lot of people now say Bergkamp wasn't very good because they go on Wikipedia and they type in Bergkamp and say, oh, well, he didn't score. He wasn't scoring 22 goals in the Invincible season. And when you look at Sancho's numbers, they're remarkable. I can't doubt that or fault that. And as an attacker, I would say from what I have seen is he probably does offer more than Saka. No, he definitely does. But is what you want for England, right? That's not the best England 11 that we've seen in terms of
mm,
ability, but it's the best 11 that we picked that we feel could win the game. I would assume someone like Saka's work rate will always, off the ball and defensive work, will always put him instead to go ahead of Sancho because, we have quite a pragmatic approach, whether you think that's right or wrong.
yeah,
So his inclusion over Sancho, I understand, but I'm not going to sit here and start telling you that Bukayo Saka is a far better player because I don't agree. But it's all about
mm,
the best 11. For Bellingham, I think to be in central midfield in 18 is very difficult. People start screaming to me and say Pedri. And I think
yeah,
England are pragmatic. They are. They are. That's what Southgate wants to be. That's what he wants to do. So yeah, again, he's another player with, maybe the following Euros is probably a better shot, but he'll be very experienced by that point. But we have the handbrake on approach. Whether you agree with that or not is up to you. But I don't think they would have played more if they're in the Premier League. I really don't think that. I just think that
mm,
one is very young, and the other is unfortunate to be vying for one spot. A flip note of all of this is that Sterling is undroppable for England.
yeah,
I think if Sterling didn't exist, we would be seeing Sancho taking up a slot compulsory, and then we would
yeah,
see another wide player complement Sancho. I think what we're seeing for England is someone complementing Sterling, which I think is Saka more than like a Jadon Sancho type.
yeah. And to be fair, they all got their chance, didn't they? Foden
Yeah,
started on that because that right wing position. I mean, there's only really, looking back in hindsight, there was only really a couple of spaces up for grabs really that were actually
yeah.
going to be were kind of contentious. You had right wing, right back, left back being possibly the main areas. Um, And I mean, depending on the shape that he played, obviously we discussed that, and obviously he did change it for the Germany and for the Germany game in the final. Um, but he did give each player a chance at right wing. He started with Foden. Did he? I can't recall if he started with Grealish in any game, but yeah, it was the Scotland game that Grealish started, but not on the right. But um, Saka got his chance, Sancho got his chance, as did Foden, and the one that did the best out of all of them, in theory, or the one that was more effective, and as you said, complements Sterling and Kane a lot better, was Saka and his searing
Mm.
pace and his technical ability, and he was excellent. And he had that kind of youthful fearlessness to an extent that we don't often see in England setups. England setups of old, it's very nervy. It might go back to our point earlier, but they've actually got a feel good factor camp now, so they can feel like they can actually lose even though what we've seen from the final suggests otherwise, because the camp have been great, but the fans haven't in defeat. Not we still say it's a minority, but there's been a lot of issues since then. Um, but having someone youthful like him, feeling like he could really express himself on the biggest stage for his country and play without fear, was perhaps why he got put ahead, and is actually again just another reason why I feel that Southgate has really galvanised this team. More so than the likes of Hodgson. And I'm just so glad we didn't have Allardyce. I know I know he was at Sunderland, but that
Who?
would have been Aldicio.
Ah,
Just
yeah, yeah, Aladicia, yeah. Know him well. Italian's finest, Italy's finest. Um, yeah, no, I think Seb Allardyce would have been interesting to see. I think what we've got now is a manager that is really for youth, which is what everyone wants. Is that buzzword? There are question marks over the style of play, but in terms of the media perception and everything else, I think he's done a great job. Especially in difficult. I think on a side note, focusing on Southgate in particular, what we also have to highlight is the complexities of his own job. England has
mm,
seen massive issues over race in terms of Black Lives Matter and players taking a knee. huge waves of barrage of abuse of some of his key players. We're talking
Mm,
Sterling, Rashford,
yeah.
more recently with Sancho and Saka. And I think he's spoken really well about that. He's battled with government as well as fans protesting that. That's not easy. We're talking about how the media have changed the perception of England football, which they have done. But then it wasn't that long ago where people were booing, taking a knee in the warm ups, and when government were deciding to say or to condone that and be like, yeah, that's fine. And I think it shows a real strength of character from not only Southgate but the team to ride through that. I'm not saying that the fans didn't boo when the game started, but I think for certain individuals within that squad, that can be very difficult to deal with. So I think that's credit to the young players you mentioned, the manager and the media as well, to try and shape that.
Yeah, and I think it almost goes back to what I was saying earlier about the role of an international manager. Like, if you think about Southgate's role, he's almost like a statesman. He's like a he's like a member of
Yeah.
parliament. Like, his role is almost like he's almost like a ministerial role because he has to actually deal with all these like political forces, all these kind of issues in our society that don't apply to other football managers, apply to him because he's representing the nation.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, so I think it's a good point, and I think he's handled it so well. So again, Team Southgate.
Yeah, Team Southgate is always he's a good lad. And the final one is one of the final sections to kind of look at is defeating, old enemies. And what I mean by that is, look, when you meet Gary the pessimist at the pub, he will tell you that Croatia are past their best and all their players are rubbish, and he will tell you that Germany are clueless and they had to call back like Thomas Muller because they don't know what they're doing. But I've seen England falter against the first average side or decent side they come up against in European tournaments. So I think that is a lot of progress for them to have managed to do that. And it's very easy to go and say, "Oh yeah, but they weren't that good." I mean, what do people want? Like on a flip side, right? What do people actually want?
Yeah.
People are like, "Oh, England only got tested in the final. England only got tested in the semis last time." It's like I don't really know what you're trying to say. Do you want England to be in the group of death? Then they're supposed to face Belgium. Then they need to face Portugal again somehow. Then they need to face Italy. Italy have 15 when England have 9. Like, I don't really know what
Yeah.
fans want, but I think it does say a lot. In particular, the Germany game and the Croatia game, where their pragmatic style, their energy and commitment, you brought really key wins. In particular, Croatia, they really, really stifled Croatia. They were really vibrant in attack. I thought they played really, really well. Foden, I thought, was excellent until he came off, and I think that really kick-started a good tournament. The Germany game was a bit different. They sat back and were very dogged. They didn't create too much, but the chances they had were literally really, really big chances. As in, the probability of those going in for the XG gods out there would have been very high.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Um, yeah, well, I do think we have a high caliber of player now as well, which feeds into well, in addition to the point around Southgate and Co, and the squad that we have. So we do have a higher caliber of player, and I do think we're now playing at more major European domestic um, fixtures for their clubs, so they played against better players more often. So when they come up against better teams, they actually did a bit better. I thought, it did worry me in the group stages when we started against Croatia. We did okay against Croatia, Scotland. We couldn't get past them. Czech Republic, we did okay. They had a few chances, and we managed to get through with only scoring 2 goals. I know we didn't concede, but it was a bit of a concern. So when we came up against Germany, I almost thought when we came up against Germany, I was like, okay, I'm actually kind of glad we're not playing against like a minnow again, because when you play against a team that's parking the bus, um, that can be so difficult to break down. Um, and it did worry me. I wanted to see how we were actually fared against a side that is better and therefore is less likely to sit back. In the end, it was us that was sitting back to an extent with that 5,
Mm.
just like we kind of did in the final. But Foden is a prime example of someone who's had, as the seasons went on, has had more minutes and more starts for Man City. I mean, he played against PSG in the Champions League, for example, semi-finals. So I don't know if he's played in the final, but it just shows where our players are now playing. Obviously, back in the day, keep go back to the Capello era, but that was like that was just so painful, not just because of the green goal where it went through his legs, but just
Mm.
because there's a lot of hype around that tournament in 2010. Obviously, we had players there who were playing for top sides. We had Wayne Rooney, Stephen Gerrard, Frank Lampard. These are all high caliber players playing in big fixtures. But I think across the whole 11 now, we're seeing more players play for big sides and big games. That being said, players like Phillips and Rice, for them, for them, for most of those players, that game on Sunday was the biggest game of their career.
Hmm.
But even like the quarters and the semis for the people like Phillips and Rice, I think that's a massive learning curve for them. And I think they'll still fare better for going through this tournament. And I'm just very glad as well that the World Cup is next year and not in, like, say, 2 years. So we can kind of try and hopefully build on a bit of momentum from this tournament. And then some of the players like Stones and Maguire, who I think have formed a good partnership, won't be too much older as a
Yeah.
result. Because as we've discussed offline, even though we've got more players playing higher caliber fixtures and we've got a high caliber player, there isn't in the spine, there isn't an absolute mountain of players coming through, which has been England's problems for a number of years.
Yeah, I think you're bang on. The only England have, multiple, like numerous options on the flanks. Left back, right back, wings, both wings. And there's some good attacking midfield options, I would say. The likes
Yeah.
of Mount, Foden. I know he plays wide for City, but he can play central. But also James Maddison. I keep forgetting because he's been linked to Arsenal, that's why. But James Maddison, we've left at home. There's been some really good players. I know there's Emma Smith Rowe as well at Arsenal, and there's an abundance of young talent that could definitely play. Curtis Jones at Liverpool was another young player, so had a very, very good season. So there are players that can come through into that middle. But my worry is actually the spine, like you said, but in particular striker, the drop from Kane and CB as well.
Mm.
We have people like Ben White, who is relatively young, 23, and Tomori is a similar age, maybe 22. But yeah, that is something kind of to look out for England. But I think the future is bright. I think there's enough talented players there and enough European sides that, as talented as they are, also have holes as well. As much as brilliant as Spain were in the tournament, I thought they didn't have any right backs. I know Marcus Llorente played there, but they seemed to be struggling there. Emerson
Mm.
as Spinazzola's backup. I don't know how many Premier League games he played for Chelsea, but it must have been under 10. Yet they were a very good side in the final. So I wouldn't say that England's spine is an issue as well, but it's not as if the rest of Europe are extremely powerful and untouchable. I mean, the future is definitely bright, and hopefully 2022 will end with beers and not tears.
That's the is that going to be the new motto for the new slogan for the podcast? I think why football.
Beers, no tears, no tears, no
Beers
beers.
not
No,
beers
yeah,
not tears.
yeah, beers and tears. You know what? I quite like it. To be fair, I should say it to myself after an Arsenal loss. Maybe that might help me through some dark times.
God, I've seen some tears after a few Arsenal defeats in your company, I must say. All right, Natchez. Well, I think we'll wrap up there. Thank you so much for the discussion there on England, how far they've come. Particularly, I think we drew a line from Capello onwards, even though it
Yeah,
possibly could have went back further. But yeah, I think the future is bright. I've kind of got over Sunday and look on to the next year and the next tournament in 2022, and hopefully we can finally bring it home. But yeah, thank you all for listening, and yeah, we'll catch you next time. Cheers, guys.
cheers, guys.